Hello and welcome back to Weekly Buying Tips. I'm Dean Berman from Berman Buys. Today I want to talk about, should you go to auction or try and buy the property beforehand? It's a common conundrum I see for many buyers out there, and there are both pros and cons for both methods. Generally speaking, when you go to auction, the benefit, or one of the key benefits with auction, is that the whole process is transparent. You can see what's happening in front of you. You're there, you're bidding, you have your number, and you can affect the outcome by placing up the number and putting a bid through. Beforehand, so this is buying a property beforehand during an auction campaign, there is a bit of unknowns in the sense that you're very reliant on what the agent sort of tells you, and it is their ethical and moral duty to be honest with you. But there is a little bit of an unknown factor buying beforehand. Another important point to note is that, be it buying beforehand or buying at auction, the agent will give you some sort of price or guide price or range, and generally speaking, within 10% of that is where they are legally allowed to quote. So if they're saying $1 million auction guide price, there's a chance that it could go 1.1, give or take. They may be thinking somewhere around there. There has been instances where I have seen massive increases, 40-45% or give or take. But those are rare occasions, and yeah, probably not ideal, but it doesn't happen every day like that from my experience. Another thing to note is that with the auction process, you generally need everything completed beforehand. So this includes the contract review, that's done by your solicitor or conveyancer, getting the pest and building inspection done and or strata report done, ensuring that your finance is all ready to go. The key thing with buying beforehand during an auction campaign is it's in many ways a similar process to buying at auction, because oftentimes the agent and the seller would want what's called a 66W, or an unconditional exchange, which basically means that you're buying the property with no conditions on the purchase. Effectively under auction conditions. Another key point is that emotions are very prevalent in both methods, but I would probably argue that under the auction conditions, they're probably at their highest. This is mainly because you're in a pressure cooker situation. You really want this property, and you can actually see your competition, who you're going up against, and there's a chance that sometimes emotions can get the better, and they sort of logic goes out the door. And that's why it's very important to really set a maximum price on auction day and really know your finances and your numbers. And if it goes over that price, then it just wasn't meant to be, unfortunately, in that circumstance. There's no point really putting yourselves under that financial stress, and your family or whoever else, if it's going to really stretch you past your limits. Let's just say under auction conditions, you would pay the deposit once the auction is finished. You'd sign the contract and pay the deposit, whatever you've agreed with the agent, usually 10%, but sometimes maybe less. And beforehand, you would generally pay the deposit within a few hours of agreeing to the price. So you've gone through the negotiation. I've seen times when negotiation can be backwards and forwards in text messages. It can be phone calls, it could be emails, it could be anything really. And sometimes it can go backwards and forwards for a couple minutes and then it's done. Sometimes it can be hours. Sometimes it could literally be 1, 2, or 3 days slow, prolonged negotiation. Either way, once the negotiation comes to fruition and you have an outcome, and assuming you're successful, that's when you would generally pay the deposit if you're buying beforehand, usually within a few hours of that happening, because you certainly don't want to give or leave the door open for other people to start making higher offers than you've already made beforehand. It's really hard to say which one will enable you to achieve a lower, or whereby you'll be paying a higher price. I guess the general thought is that if you go to auction due to emotion and competition, the price can potentially go higher, but not always. There's certainly instances where I've seen prices go lower at auction because there's just not sufficient competition. Because at the end of the day, an auction is really governed by bidders, and the more bidders you have, the more competition you have, and therefore the more potential the price can rise. So if it's only one person competing against themselves, then the chances are that that property is not going to get a huge price, because who's going to want to start bidding against yourself? Whereas if you got multiple bidders, then the chances are the price will go higher, because people will have different budgets, and generally the ones that buy it will have the highest budget, and therefore they'll push each other until they get to that level whereby they see value and they're prepared to go to for that property.